The fluorescent lights in the executive floor of Castellano Tower hummed their usual monotonous song as I pushed my cleaning cart down the marble hallway. 3 years I'd been doing this, mopping floors that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent, emptying trash cans for executives who never looked at my face, polishing windows that overlooked a city I cleaned but would never own. My name is Daniel Cross, though most people in this building don't know it. To them, I'm just the night janitor, the guy who appears after 10 p.m. when the offices empty out, who makes everything spotless by morning, who exists in that invisible space between the corporate world's closing and opening acts. I'm 34 years old, though the scars and the limp make me look older. 6 years ago, I was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cross, Marine Corps, 3 tours in Afghanistan, more medals than I care to remember, and a discharge that came with a Purple Heart and enough psychological baggage to fill a Master B of Lane, a warehouse. The limp came from shrapnel in Kandahar. The scars on my hands came from pulling my squad leader out of a burning Humvee. The nightmares came free of charge and never stopped coming. When I got back stateside, I discovered that decorated war hero doesn't translate well on civilian job applications, especially when you're carrying a diagnosis of PTSD and a resume that lists expert in tactical operations as your primary skill. So I took what I could get: night shift janitorial work at Castellano Tower, a gleaming 40-story monument to wealth in the heart of Manhattan. The pay was decent. The hours meant I rarely had to interact with people, and most importantly, nobody asked questions. I showed up, did my work, collected my paycheck, and went home to my studio apartment in Queens, where I lived alone with my demons and a cat named Murphy, who'd adopted me from an alley behind a Chinese restaurant. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known that October night, was that Castellano Tower wasn't just another corporate building. The top 5 floors weren't leased to investment firms or law offices like the directory in the lobby suggested. They were the operational headquarters of the Castellano crime family, one of New York's most powerful organized crime operations, run with ruthless efficiency by a woman most people had never heard of, but everyone in certain circles feared. I learned this truth the hard way, on a Thursday night that started like any other, and ended with me standing over 3 unconscious men, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and the most dangerous woman in New York staring at me like I'd just rewritten every rule she thought she understood about the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Thursday started at 10 p.m., same as always. I clocked in at the service entrance, nodded to Marcus, the security guard, who was working his way through a nursing degree one-night class at a time, and took the service elevator up to the 35th floor. My route was always the same: start at 35, work my way up to 40, then back down to 30. The lower floors had their own day crew. The top floors were mine. The 35th floor was quiet when I arrived. Offices dark, except for the occasional desk lamp left burning by someone who'd forgotten to turn it off. I started with the bathrooms, not glamorous work, but somebody had to do it, then moved through the corridors with my commercial vacuum, the kind that's supposedly quiet but still sounds like a jet engine in the empty silence. I was emptying a trash can near the elevator bank when I heard it. Voices, raised and angry, coming from the stairwell. Not unusual in a building this size. Sometimes people used the stairs for private phone calls, arguments they didn't want overheard in open offices. Usually I just ignored it, minded my own business, finished my work, and moved on. But something about these voices made me pause, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up the way it used to in Kandahar when the air felt wrong, when my instincts screamed danger before my conscious mind could identify the threat. One voice was male, loud, aggressive, slurred slightly like he'd been drinking. The other was female, lower, controlled, but with an edge of barely contained fury underneath. "You think you can just shut me out?" the male voice shouted. I built half of this operation. My connections in Jersey, my relationships with the unions, you'd have nothing without me. You built nothing, Vincent. The female voice was cold as winter ice. You inherited access through your father's reputation and squandered it through incompetence and greed. The only reason you're still breathing is because your last name means something to the old guard. My last name? My last name? Vincent's voice rose to a near scream. You married into this family, Isabella. You're not blood. You're just some nobody from Brooklyn who spread her. The sound of a slap echoed through the stairwell, sharp and definitive. I should have kept walking. I should have pushed my cart to the next office and pretended I'd heard nothing. In my 3 years here, I'd learned that the top floors operated by different rules, that the people who worked up here weren't just corporate executives, and that asking questions was the fastest way to lose a job I desperately needed. But old instincts die hard, and something about the violence in that man's voice, the barely controlled rage, triggered something in me that 6 years of civilian life hadn't managed to bury. I'd seen enough abuse in my life in war zones, in the neighborhoods I'd grown up in the faces of people who'd given up fighting back. I'd promised myself that if I ever had the power to stop it, I would. I moved toward the stairwell door quietly, years of tactical training making my footsteps silent, despite the industrial cleaning cart I'd abandoned by the elevators. Through the small window in the door, I could see them on the landing between floors. She was stunning even through the reinforced glass, I could see that. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her posture was rigid, controlled, but I could read the tension in her shoulders, the way her weight had shifted slightly back, defensive. He was bigger, maybe 40, with the kind of build that came from expensive gym memberships rather than actual physical labor. His face was flushed red, veins standing out on his neck, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You fucking bitch," he snarled, taking a step toward her. "You think you can hit me? You think because the old man left you in charge that you're untouchable? I think you should leave. Vincent, now, before you do something we'll both regret." Her voice remained steady, but I saw her hand move subtly toward her jacket, reaching for something. "Before I do something?" He laughed, ugly and harsh. "You've been doing things, Isabella. Making decisions without consulting the council, cutting deals that undermine my operations, treating me like I'm some fucking errand boy instead of a captain in this family. You're a liability, Vincent. Your gambling debts, your mistresses who talk too much, your nephew, who thinks he can move product through my territory without permission. You've become more trouble than you're worth." That's when he grabbed her. His hand shot out, faster than I expected from someone who looked half drunk, and caught her wrist as she reached for whatever was in her jacket. His other hand came up to her throat, slamming her back against the concrete wall hard enough that I heard the impact through the door. I was moving before I consciously decided to. Move, muscle memory, and training taking over. The stairwell door burst open under my shoulder. I'd never stopped being good at tactical entries, and I was on the landing in 3 strides. "Get your hands off her." My voice came out low, controlled. The tone I'd used to give commands in combat zones. The tone that expected immediate obedience because the alternative was unacceptable. Vincent's head snapped around, his eyes widening in shock at the sudden interruption. His grip on Isabella's throat loosened fractionally, enough that I saw her chest expand as she dragged in air. "Who the fuck are you?" Vincent demanded, but he didn't release her. His other hand was still gripping her wrist, keeping her hand away from whatever weapon she'd been reaching for. "The person telling you to let her go." I took another step forward, assessing angles, distances, threat levels. Vincent was bigger than me by maybe 30 pounds, but it was soft weight, pampered gym muscle rather than functional strength. He was drunk or close to it, which made him unpredictable but slower. And he'd made the critical error of dividing his attention between 2 threats. "This is none of your business, Janitor." He spat the last word like an insult. "Get the fuck out of here before you get hurt." I'd been called worse by better people. Last chance. Let her go, walk away, and we all forget this happened. "Or what?" Vincent sneered, but I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Something in my posture, my tone, my absolute lack of fear was registering. "You going to stop me? You're a fucking janitor. I could buy and sell you 10 times over. Money doesn't help much when your trachea's crushed." I said it conversationally, almost friendly. About 6 pounds of pressure, applied to the right spot. "You black out in 8 seconds. Brain damage starts around 4 minutes. I can apply that pressure in less time than it takes you to think about stopping me." His grip on Isabella loosened another fraction. She was watching me now, her dark eyes sharp and assessing despite the red marks on her throat where his fingers had been. "You threatening me?" Vincent's voice had lost some of its bravado. "Just giving you information. What you do with it is your choice." I moved closer, slowly, hands visible but ready. "But understand this, you don't get to put your hands on people who can't fight back. Not while I'm standing here, not while I'm breathing." "Can't fight back?" Vincent barked a laugh, but it sounded forced. "You have no idea who you're defending, Janitor. This bitch runs, don't touch her." The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. Louder, harder, carrying the weight of every helpless moment I'd witnessed, every time I'd been too late to stop violence, every face that haunted my dreams. The change in my voice from controlled calm to barely leashed fury made Vincent flinch. His hands dropped away from Isabella completely, and he took a step back. That's when Isabella moved. She was fast, faster than I expected. Her knee came up hard into Vincent's groin, doubling him over with a gasping wheeze. Her hand, finally free, pulled a small pistol from her jacket and had it pressed against his temple before he could recover. "You made 3 mistakes tonight, Vincent." Her voice was cold, deadly calm. "First, you came here drunk and emotional. Second, you put your hands on me. Third," she glanced at me briefly, something unreadable in her eyes, "you did it in front of a witness who actually gave a damn." Vincent was gasping, still bent over, his face turning purple. "Isabella, wait, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. You meant every word, every threat, every moment of violence you've been contemplating for months." She pressed the gun harder against his skull. "The only reason you're still alive is because killing you here creates complications I don't need tonight." She looked at me directly for the first time, really. Looked, and I felt the weight of that gaze like a physical force. "What's your name?" "Daniel Cross." "How long have you worked here, Daniel Cross?" 3 years. "And in 3 years, you never saw anything, never heard anything, never asked questions." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "No, ma'am. But tonight you intervened. Why?" She kept the gun on Vincent, but her full attention was on me, reading me the way I'd learned to read insurgents, trying to determine if I was threat or asset or something else entirely. I met her eyes. Because he had his hands on you and you couldn't get free. Because violence against someone who can't fight back isn't acceptable. Not to me. Not ever. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "Even though you have no idea who I am? What I am? I know enough. I know this building isn't what the directory says. I know the people who work these top floors aren't regular corporate executives. And I know that, whatever else you might be, you didn't deserve what he was doing to you." She studied me for a long moment, then made a decision. "Vincent, you're going to walk out of this building. You're going to get in your car and drive directly home. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive instructions about your reassignment. You're being transferred to the Miami operation, effective immediately. You'll go without complaint, without making waves, and you'll be grateful I'm giving you the chance to leave breathing. Isabella, please, I can action. Refuse and I'll shoot you here and have Daniel help me dispose of the body. He looks like he knows how." She said it casually, like offering someone coffee. "Your choice. Miami alive, or a landfill dead." Vincent swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Isabella and me. Whatever he saw in my face made his decision easier. "Miami. I'll go to Miami. Smart man. Now get out." She lowered the gun, and Vincent scrambled away, nearly falling down the stairs in his haste to escape. We listened to his footsteps echoing away, then the distant slam of the stairwell door on a lower floor. Isabella tucked the pistol back into her jacket with practiced ease, then turned her full attention to me. Up close, she was even more striking, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, a mouth set in a firm line that suggested she smiled rarely and meant it even less often. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Daniel Cross." "I've been told both, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm Isabella Castellano. This building, these top 5 floors, the entire operation, it's mine. My late husband left it to me when he died 4 years ago, and I've spent every day since proving I deserved it." She touched her throat gingerly, where red marks were already darkening to bruises. "Vincent was a captain in the organization. His father was my husband's mentor. He's been trying to undermine me since the day I took control. He won't anymore." She laughed. But there was no humor in it. "No, thanks to you, he won't." She studied me again, that assessing gaze. "Marine Corps?" I didn't ask how she knew. "Staff Sergeant. 3 tours. Explains the tactical entry and the complete lack of fear. Most people freeze when they see a gun." "You barely blinked." "I've seen a lot of guns, Mrs. Castellano." "Isabella, if you're going to know my secrets, we should at least be on a first-name basis." She pulled out her phone, typed something quickly. "I'm going to have some people come clean up this situation. They'll want to talk to you, verify you're not going to be a problem." "I'm not a problem." "No?" She raised an eyebrow. "You just witnessed the head of a major crime family hold a gun to one of her captains. You know this building isn't legitimate. You could go to the police, the FBI, the media. How do I know you're not a problem? Because I've kept my mouth shut for 3 years. Because I need this job. And because I hesitated, then decided. Honesty was safer than any lie I could construct. Because what I saw tonight wasn't a crime boss terrorizing someone. I saw a woman defending herself from a man who thought his position gave him the right to hurt her. The rest of it doesn't matter to me. Isabella's expression shifted, something softer entering those hard eyes. You're an interesting man, Daniel Cross. Most people in your position would be terrified. But you're not afraid of me at all, are you? Should I be? Most people are. I'm not most people. No. She smiled then. A real smile. Small but genuine. You're definitely not. The stairwell door above us opened, and 2 men appeared large, professional. The kind of people who made a living being intimidating. They took one look at the scene, at Isabella's bruised throat, at me standing close enough to be either threat or protection, and their hands moved toward weapons I couldn't see but knew were there. It's fine, Isabella said quickly. Marco, Tony, this is Daniel Cross, our night janitor. He just saved my life from Vincent's latest tantrum. The 2 men relaxed fractionally but didn't stop watching me. Vincent? The one called Marco asked. Where is he? On his way home. He'll be transferring to Miami tomorrow. Daniel intervened when Vincent had me against the wall. She touched her throat again. It was getting serious. Marco and Tony exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Marco looked at me with something that might have been respect. You stepped in? Against Vincent Calabresa? He had his hands on her, I said simply. That wasn't acceptable. Wasn't acceptable, Tony repeated, like testing out a foreign phrase. He looked at Isabella. Boss, this janitor's got balls, among other qualities. Isabella's phone buzzed and she checked it quickly. Marco, I need you to handle the Vincent situation. Make sure he actually gets on a plane to Miami tomorrow. Tony, I need you to do a full background. Check on Daniel here. Everything military service, employment history, financial status, family connections. I want to know who he is and what makes him tick. On it, Tony said, pulling out his own phone. And Daniel, Isabella turned back to me. You're coming with me. We need to have a conversation about your future employment. My stomach tightened. Am I fired? Quite the opposite. But we're not having this discussion in a stairwell. She started up the stairs, then paused when I didn't immediately follow. That wasn't a request. I followed, leaving my cleaning cart abandoned on the 35th floor, walking upstairs behind a woman who commanded respect through power and fear, and wondering what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. We ended up in an office on the 40th floor that was nothing like I'd expected. I'd cleaned these offices for 3 years, but always from the outside, vacuuming hallways, emptying trash bins left outside doors, never actually entering the executive spaces. Now, standing inside Isabella Castellano's private office, I saw a room that was both elegant and functional, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, furniture that was expensive but not ostentatious, and along one wall, a series of photographs showing a younger Isabella with a man I assumed was her late husband, formal events, candid moments, a wedding photo where she looked almost unrecognizable in white lace and genuine happiness. Sit. Isabella gestured to a leather chair opposite her desk, then moved to a sideboard where crystal decanters held various liquors. Whiskey? I don't drink, ma'am, Isabella. Smart man. Neither do I, usually. But tonight qualifies as unusual. She poured herself 2 fingers of amber liquid, drank half of it in one swallow, then settled into her chair with a slight wince. The adrenaline was wearing off, I realized. The bruises on her throat were darkening, and she was starting to feel whatever injuries Vincent had inflicted. You should ice those, I said, nodding toward her neck. Later. First, we talk. She studied me over the rim of her glass. 3 years you've worked here. 3 years you've seen things, heard things, kept your mouth shut. Why? Because it wasn't my business. Because I needed the job. Because I stopped, uncertain how much honesty was safe. Because you learned in the military that sometimes the best way to survive is to be invisible. She finished for me. To do your work, keep your head down, and not ask questions about operations you weren't cleared for. Something like that. What happened tonight that wasn't keeping your head down? That was the opposite. You made yourself very visible, Daniel. And you made yourself visible protecting me. Do you understand what that means in my world? I had a pretty good idea, but I said, tell me. It means you're now associated with me. Anyone who has a problem with me now has a problem with you. Anyone who wants to hurt me might decide hurting you sends a message. You stepped into something you can't step back out of, whether you meant to or not. The words should have terrified me, should have sent me running, but I'd spent 6 years learning to live with danger, with the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment, with the understanding that safety was largely an illusion. At least this danger came with a clear purpose. I understand, I said. Do you? Because I need to be very clear about something. What you saw tonight, what you heard Vincent wasn't wrong about everything. I do run this organization. This building is the headquarters for operations that span 5 states. I have 200 people working for me in various capacities, most of whom would kill on my orders without question. I am not a good person, Daniel. I've done things that would horrify you. I've made decisions that resulted in people dying. I operate in a world that has no room for hesitation or mercy. And yet you didn't kill Vincent. You gave him an out. Something flickered in her eyes. Because killing him would have created more problems than it solved. His father's old guard would have demanded retribution. It would have meant war, bloodshed, instability. So I compromised exile instead of execution. That's not mercy, Daniel. That's strategic thinking. If you say so. She set down her glass with a sharp click. Why did you do it? Really? You could have kept walking. Should have kept walking. Vincent would have. She stopped, jaw tightening. Eventually he would have let me go. I would have handled it. Why did you intervene? I thought about the question, about all the real answers I could give. Because violence against someone weaker wasn't acceptable. Because I'd promised myself I'd never stand by and watch again. Because something in her controlled desperation had reminded me of soldiers I'd served with, people fighting battles they couldn't win but refusing to surrender. Because you couldn't get free, I said finally. Because he was hurting you and you needed help. That's reason enough. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching my face like she was trying to read something written there in a language she didn't quite understand. Then she stood, walked to the window, stared out at the glittering city below. My husband died 4 years ago, she said quietly. Heart attack at 41. Too much stress, too much rich food, too many cigars. He was old school, believed in tradition, hierarchy, respect. When he died, everyone expected his brother to take over. But Carlo's will named me. Said I had the mind for strategy, the stomach for hard decisions. She laughed softly, bitterly. Half the organization wanted me dead. The other half wanted to see if I'd fail on my own. But you didn't fail. No, I didn't fail. I consolidated power, eliminated threats, made deals that expanded our territory and increased profits. I proved I deserved the big position. But there are still men like Vincent men who think I'm an outsider, who think my gender makes me weak, who believe they should be standing where I am. She turned back to face me. Tonight, for the first time in 4 years, one of them got his hands on me, got me alone in a stairwell and showed me what he really thought about taking orders from a woman. If you hadn't intervened, her voice caught. Just slightly, just enough that I heard the crack in her armor. I don't know how it would have ended. But it ended with him running away and you still standing. That's what matters. Because of you. Because you're strong enough to handle it. I just bought you the seconds you needed. Isabella studied me for another long moment, then made a decision I could see settling across her features. I'm going to offer you a job, Daniel. Not janitor. Something else. Personal security. Close protection. You'd be with me during meetings, watching for threats I might miss. You'd have access to everything. My schedule, my operations, my weaknesses. It would pay 5 times what you're making now, plus benefits, plus a level of protection you don't currently have. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why would you trust me with that? Because in 3 years, you never asked for anything. Because tonight you put yourself at risk for a stranger without expecting reward. Because she moved closer, her eyes locked on mine. I saw how you handled Vincent. You weren't just brave, Daniel. You were competent, controlled. You knew exactly how dangerous you could be and chose not to be. That kind of restraint is rare. That kind of instinct is valuable. I'm not sure I'm the right person for Set. I'm sure. Her voice carried absolute certainty. You're exactly the right person. You just don't realize it yet. She was standing close now, close enough that I could see the bruises darkening on her throat, close enough to smell her perfume mixed with fear sweat and gunpowder residue, close enough that something shifted in the air between us, Something that had nothing to do with employment offers and everything to do with the way she was looking at me, not as a janitor or a soldier or an asset, but as a man who'd stood between her and violence without hesitation. "Think about it," she said softly. "Take the weekend. Monday. Give me your answer." "But Daniel," she reached out, her fingers brushing my arm briefly. "Understand that either way, everything's changed. You're not invisible anymore. You're someone I see. Someone I'll be watching. Someone who matters." Then she stepped back, the moment broken, and became all business again. "Marco will escort you out. Take the rest of the night off, you've earned it. Your pay will be deposited as usual Friday, plus a bonus for tonight. Call it hazard pay. It's not about need. It's about showing respect for what you did." She pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back, handed it to me. "My private number. If you have questions this weekend, if anything feels wrong, if you need anything, call me directly." I took the card, felt the weight of it like a contract I hadn't signed but was already bound to. "Isabella." "Yes?" "Ice your throat. Take some ibuprofen. Get some rest. Whatever else you are, you're still human. You still need to take care of yourself." That small smile again, genuine and surprised. "Are you taking care of me, Daniel Cross?" Someone should. Something complex moved through her expression, gratitude, longing, vulnerability. She immediately locked down behind professional composure. "Monday. Give me your answer Monday." Marco was waiting in the hallway, and he led me back down to the 35th floor, where my cleaning cart still sat abandoned by the elevator. "You really didn't know who she was?" he asked as we walked. "Not specifically. I knew this building was more than it appeared. And you stepped in anyway. Against Vincent Calabrese, who's killed people for less than looking at him wrong." He had his hands on her throat. What was I supposed to do? Marco stopped, turned to face me fully. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have decided it wasn't their problem. You made it your problem. He held out his hand. "Marco Donovan, head of security. If you take the job she's offering, we'll be working together." I shook his hand. "If I take it, you'll take it. Nobody turns down Isabella Castellano. Not when she's personally asking." He grinned. "Besides, once you're in, you're in. That's how this works. You jumped into the deep end tonight, Daniel. Might as well learn to swim." He left me at my cart, and I stood there for a long moment, staring at the industrial cleaning supplies, and the mop bucket, and the life I'd been living for 3 years. A simple life, a safe life, a life where I was invisible and that invisibility protected me. Then I looked at the business card in my hand, at Isabella's private number written in elegant script, and knew that invisibility was over. I finished my shift because that's what you do, you finish what you start. Cleaned the remaining floors, emptied the trash, vacuumed the halls, but everything looked different now. Every office door I passed might hide secrets. Every window might overlook territory that Isabella Castellano controlled. The building I'd thought I knew was suddenly unfamiliar, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. It was 3 a.m. when I finally left, taking the service elevator down to the lobby where Marcus was still at his desk, still working his way through anatomy textbooks. "Quiet night?" he asked without looking up. "Quieter than some." If he noticed I'd left my cart on 35, instead of bringing it down to storage, he didn't mention it. Marcus had been working this building longer than me. He knew when not to ask questions. Outside, October wind cut through my jacket as I limped toward, and the subway station 3 blocks away. My leg always hurt worse at night, the shrapnel wounds aching in the cold. But tonight I barely noticed. My mind was replaying the scene in the stairwell. The moment I'd burst through that door, the look in Isabella's eyes when I'd said, "Don't touch her," like I had the right to make demands, like I was anything other than a janitor who'd stumbled into someone else's war. I thought about Vincent's hands on her throat, her inability to reach her weapon, the calculation in her eyes when she'd realized I was there, fear that I might be another threat, then relief, then something else entirely when I'd positioned myself between her and danger. I thought about the job offer, 5 times my current salary, protection, access to a world I'd been cleaning around the edges of for 3 years without ever really seeing. And I thought about the way she'd looked at me in her office, like I was someone worth seeing, someone who mattered. By the time I reached my apartment, dawn was starting to break over Queens. Murphy met me at the door, winding between my legs and demanding breakfast with the insistence only a cat could manage. I fed him, made coffee I didn't drink, and stood at my window watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Isabella Castellano was probably still working, still managing her empire, still carrying bruises on her throat from a man who'd thought he could hurt her with impunity. Somewhere out there, Vincent was packing for Miami, knowing he'd gotten off lucky. And somewhere in the space between what my life had been and what it might become, a decision was forming. Not because I needed the money, though I did. Not because I craved excitement or danger, though some part of me had never stopped missing the clarity of combat, but because when I'd seen those hands on her throat, when I'd heard her controlled voice barely hiding fear, something in me had roared to life, something I'd thought was broken, buried under 6 years of civilian numbness and PTSD and trying to be invisible. The part of me that protected people, that stood between the weak and the strong, that said, no further, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Isabella Castellano didn't know it yet, but she'd already gotten her answer. Monday couldn't come fast enough. The weekend crawled by with excruciating slowness. Saturday morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. Background check complete. You're clear. Welcome to the family. Tony, I stared at the message for a long time, trying to process how quickly they'd worked. Less than 48 hours and they knew everything about me. My military service, my medical discharge, my PTSD diagnosis, probably even my credit score, and the fact that I'd been 3 months behind on rent last winter. The second text came an hour later, this time from Isabella's private number. Marco will meet you Monday at 8 a.m. Wear something professional. We have work to do. No question about whether I'd accepted. Just the assumption that of course I had, because people didn't refuse Isabella Castellano. Marco had been right about that. I spent Saturday afternoon at a discount men's store in Queens, using money I probably shouldn't have spent on 2 suits that fit well enough, dress shirts, ties that looked professional without being flashy. The woman helping me, probably 60, with kind eyes and hands that knew fabric, took one look at my awkward uncertainty and essentially dressed me herself. Job interview? She asked, adjusting a collar. New position. More corporate. Well, you wear it well. Military bearing, you can always tell. She smiled. They're lucky to have you, whoever they are. If only she knew. Sunday I spent cleaning my apartment with the same thoroughness I applied to Castellano Tower. Scrubbed floors, organized closets, threw away accumulated junk from 3 years of barely living. Murphy watched from various perches with judgmental cat eyes, clearly unimpressed by my sudden domesticity. Things are changing, I told him while washing dishes that had been piling up for a week. New job, new life, new everything. Murphy yawned, entirely unconcerned with my existential crisis. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Isabella's face in that stairwell, the controlled mask slipping just enough to show fear underneath, the red marks on her throat, the way she'd looked at me after Vincent fled, like she was seeing me truly for the first time, and couldn't quite figure out what she was seeing. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and did what I always did when my mind wouldn't shut down push-ups until my arms shook, sit-ups until my core burned, the physical exhaustion that sometimes, if I was lucky, drowned out the mental noise. It didn't work. By the time my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I'd managed maybe 2 hours of restless unconsciousness, punctuated by dreams of stairwells and hands around, throats and my own voice shouting words I couldn't quite remember but felt in my bones. I showered, shaved carefully, dressed in one of the new suits, charcoal gray, white shirt, dark blue tie, stared at my reflection and barely recognized the man looking back. The last time I'd worn anything this formal was my military dress uniform, and that felt like a different life, a different person. The limp was more pronounced this morning, my leg protesting the stress and lack of sleep. I grabbed my cane, something I usually avoided out of stubborn pride, and headed for the subway. Marco was waiting in the lobby of Castellano Tower when I arrived at 7:55 a.m., 5 minutes early because punctuality had been drilled into me by the Marines and never quite left. He looked me up and down, nodded approval. Not bad, Cross. Almost look like you belong here. He handed me a laminated badge with my photo. When had they taken that? And the title, Executive Security Consultant, printed beneath my name. This gets you access to floors 35 through 40. Anywhere else, you need specific authorization. Understood. Isabella's in meetings until 10. I'm going to give you the tour, brief you on protocols, introduce you to the team. Questions? About 1,000, but I settled for, what exactly does Executive Security Consultant mean? Marco grinned. It means you're her shadow. You go where she goes. Watch what she watches. And if anyone so much as looks at her wrong, you step in. Think of it as protective detail with better pay and worse hours. We took the private elevator, the one I'd never had access to as a janitor, directly to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was elegant without being ostentatious. A woman in her 50s sat at the desk, silver hair perfectly styled, eyes sharp as she assessed me. Daniel Cross, meet Sophia Romano. She runs Isabella's schedule, which means she essentially runs everyone's life. Marco made the bis. Introduction with obvious respect. Sophia, this is our new addition. The janitor. Sophia's voice was cultured, educated, carrying the faint remnants of an Italian accent. Or should I say, former janitor. Isabella speaks highly of you, Mr. Cross. Just Daniel, please. Daniel, then. She stood, offered her hand. Her grip was firm, assured. You'll find we're a small operation here, intimate. Everyone knows everyone, which means discretion is paramount. What you see, what you hear, it stays within these walls. Understood. Good. She pulled out a tablet, tapped efficiently. I'm sending you Isabella's schedule for the week. You'll receive updates in real time. She has 12 meetings scheduled for today, 3 of them off-site. Marco will brief you on the specific protocols for external security. The tour continued through the executive floor. Conference rooms with soundproofing and signal jammers. Isabella's private office, the one I'd been in Thursday night, now looking less threatening in daylight. A security operations center where banks of monitors showed feeds from cameras throughout the building and, I realized with growing understanding, throughout much of the surrounding neighborhood. We monitor everything within a 6-block radius, Marco explained, gesturing to the screens. Traffic cameras, street cameras, our own discrete installations. If something happens near this building, we know about it before the police do. 2 other men were in the security center, both looked former military. Both assessed me with the same careful evaluation I'd given countless new squad members over the years. Marco made quick introductions. James Martinez, former Army Rangers. Kyle Foster, former NYPD SWAT. Gentleman, Daniel Cross, former Marine Corps, 3 tours, Afghanistan, joining us as Isabella's primary protection detail. We exchanged nods, the subtle acknowledgement of shared experience. These were men who understood violence, who'd lived with it, and who knew how to handle it professionally. I was among my own kind for the first time in years. Primary protection, Kyle said, raising an eyebrow. That's usually my job. Was your job? Marco corrected. As of today, Daniel's her shadow. You're secondary, backup when needed, but she specifically requested Daniel for close protection. Something passed over Kyle's face, not quite anger, but definitely not pleasure, because he stopped Vincent in a stairwell. Because she trusts him. Marco's tone made it clear the discussion was over. We all serve at her discretion. She's chosen Daniel. We support that choice. The tension hung in the air for a moment before Kyle nodded curtly. Understood. But Cross, you screw this up, people die. Including her? You ready for that weight? I've carried heavier. Kyle studied me, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Welcome to the team. The briefing continued for another hour. Protocols for motorcades, safe houses scattered throughout the city, evacuation routes, threat assessment procedures. It was similar to the protective details I'd run in Afghanistan, just with different terrain and different threats. Biggest danger isn't external, James said, pulling up files on the monitors. It's internal. People like Vincent who think they should be in charge, who see Isabella as an obstacle rather than a leader. They know the building, know the routines, know how to get close. Like Thursday night. Exactly like Thursday night. Marco's expression was grim. Vincent got sloppy, got emotional, made a move he should have planned better. But there are others, smarter ones, patient ones. Your job is to spot them before they make their move. At 9:45, Sophia's voice came through the intercom. Marco, Isabella's asking for Daniel. My stomach tightened. Now? Now. Marco clapped me on the shoulder. Don't worry. She doesn't bite. Usually. I took the elevator up 1 floor. Isabella's private office occupied part of the 41st level, separate from the main operations floor. The doors opened onto a small vestibule with a single door, 2 guards flanking it. They nodded at Marco, assessed me, stepped aside. Marco knocked twice, opened the door. Boss. Daniel Cross reporting as requested. Send him in. Marco gave me an encouraging nod and left, closing the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, adjusting to the space. Isabella's private office was larger than the one below, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls offering panoramic views of Manhattan. The furniture was darker here, more personal. Photographs covered one wall her late husband figured prominently, but there were others. A younger Isabella with an elderly couple who must have been her parents. Groups of men in formal wear at what looked like weddings and christenings. The history of a family I was now, somehow, part of. Isabella herself stood at the windows, backlit by morning sun, wearing a burgundy suit that was professional without being severe. When she turned to face me, I saw she'd covered the bruises on her throat with makeup and a silk scarf. But the marks were still visible if you knew to look. Daniel. My name in her voice did something to my chest. You came. You knew I would. I hoped. She moved closer, studying me in the new suit with obvious approval. You look different. Good different. Professional. Marco said I almost look like I belong here. Almost? That small smile. I think you belong here more than most. How do you feel? Terrified. Exhilarated. Like I'd stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit the ground yet. Ready to work. Good. Because we have a situation. She moved to her desk, tapped a tablet to life. Vincent didn't go to Miami. My hand instinctively moved toward where a weapon would be if I was carrying one muscle memory from too many ambushes. Where is he? Unknown. He checked into a hotel near LaGuardia Friday night, was supposed to board a morning flight Saturday. Never. Showed. His phone's off, credit cards unused, and he hasn't contacted anyone in the organization. He's planning something. Obviously. Isabella's voice was calm, but I could see tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself too carefully. The question is what? Marco has people looking, but Vincent knows how our systems work. He knows how to disappear if he wants to. You think he'll come after you? I think he's humiliated and angry and blames me for his situation. Men like Vincent don't accept exile gracefully. She met my eyes. Which is why I need you close. Very close. Starting now, you don't leave my side except when absolutely necessary. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Understood. What's today's schedule? Meetings here until noon. Lunch, with representatives from our construction union. Partnership that's at Marcello's downtown, which means motorcade and external security. Afternoon session with our accountants reviewing third-quarter finances. Evening reception at the Plaza charity event. Very public, very visible. The reception is the highest risk. Yes, but it's also necessary. Showing weakness. Canceling commitments because Vincent's made threats that invites more challenges. I have to be seen as unshakable. Then we make sure you are. I moved to the windows, assessed sight lines, potential threats, old instincts clicking into place. The Plaza event, how many guests? Approximately 200. Mix of legitimate business people and our associates. Vincent won't make a move there too public, too many witnesses, but the arrival and departure are vulnerable points. So we vary the route, use decoy vehicles, time the departure so you're not the first or last to leave. I was thinking out loud, running tactical scenarios. I'll need to survey the venue beforehand, identify exits, establish rally points if evacuation becomes necessary. When I turned back, Isabella was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've done this before. Protective details, Afghanistan, high-value targets, hostile territory, different context, same principles. And it doesn't bother you, being back in that mindset? The question was more personal than professional, and I considered lying before deciding she deserved honesty. It bothers me less than I expected. The structure, the purpose, the clear objectives. I've missed it. Civilian life doesn't have the same clarity. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. A knock at the door interrupted us. Sophia's voice. Isabella, the union representatives are here for the 10 o'clock. Give me 5 minutes. Isabella turned back to me. This meeting they're going to ask questions about you. New face, suddenly in the room, clearly security. Let me handle the explanations. What do I do? Stand there. Look intimidating. Don't react to anything they say, no matter how provocative. These men are testing boundaries constantly. They'll push to see if you're a threat or just decoration. And if they push too hard, that dangerous smile. Then they'll discover you're definitely not decoration. The meeting was a masterclass in power dynamics. 4 men in expensive suits, representing various construction unions that I quickly realized were fronts for Isabella's money laundering operations. They spoke in careful euphemisms about projects and investments, while Isabella orchestrated the conversation with surgical precision. I stood behind her right shoulder, exactly where Marco had positioned me, hands clasped in front, face neutral, watching everything. The men glanced at me frequently, trying to figure out if I was threat or accessory. One of them, heavy-set, late 50s, with a Brooklyn accent, finally addressed me directly. "You're new. Don't recognize you." From the usual rotation. "Daniel Cross." I didn't elaborate. "Military?" "Marine Corps." "Huh. Isabella's usually more careful about new blood. Must be something special about you." "He is." Isabella's voice carried a warning. Daniel stopped Vincent Calabrese from making a very serious mistake Thursday night. That makes him not just new blood, but trusted blood. The room's energy shifted immediately. The 4 men exchanged glances, reassessing me entirely. "Vincent made a move?" The Brooklyn accent was more careful now. "We hadn't heard." "Because I contained it before it became everyone's problem. Vincent's been reassigned to Miami. Daniel is now my primary protection." "Any questions?" None of them had questions. The meeting continued, and I watched Isabella work commanding without being aggressive, making decisions that affected millions of dollars like she was ordering coffee, reading the men across from her so accurately she seemed to know what they'd say before they said it. When they finally left, she exhaled slowly and rolled her shoulders. "Well, that's done. They were afraid of you. They're afraid of what I represent. A woman in power in a world that doesn't traditionally accept that. They're constantly waiting for me to fail, to prove I don't deserve this position." She stood, moved to the windows. "But I keep not failing, and that makes them more afraid." "Good. Fear is respect wearing a different mask." She laughed, surprised. "That's almost poetic, Daniel." "I have my moments." The rest of the morning followed a similar pattern. I stood silent and watchful through 3 more meetings, learning the rhythms of Isabella's empire. Construction. Imports that were definitely not what the paperwork claimed. Consulting services that seemed to involve a lot of money, changing hands with no clear product delivered. The legitimate world and the criminal underworld woven together so seamlessly that separating them would be impossible. At noon, Marco appeared with 3 other security team members. "Motorcade's ready. James is driving. Kyle's in the follow vehicle. I'll take point in the lead car." The trip to Marcello's was my first experience with Isabella's full security protocol. 3 identical black SUVs, windows tinted, moving through Manhattan traffic in tight formation. I sat beside Isabella in the middle vehicle, hyper-aware of every car that got too close, every pedestrian that looked twice, every potential threat in a city full of them. "You're very tense," Isabella observed. "I'm very vigilant. There's a difference." "Is there? You look like you're expecting an ambush." "Always expect an ambush. Then you're prepared when it happens. Spoken like someone who's survived actual ambushes." 3. "Fourth one got me the shrapnel in my leg and the ticket home." Her hand moved, almost touched my knee, then stopped. "Does it hurt?" "Your leg?" "Manageable. Worse in cold weather. Worse when I'm tired. Right now it's just a reminder to stay sharp." Marcello's was an upscale Italian restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where a single entree cost more than I used to make in a day. But it was also, I quickly realized, owned by the Castellano family. Every staff member knew Isabella. Every table had been arranged for maximum security, and the private room they escorted us to had exactly 1 entrance and clear sightlines to all potential approaches. The lunch meeting was with 3 union officials who spoke openly about problematic workers and resolving disputes in ways that made it clear they weren't talking about arbitration. Isabella handled it with the same calm competence she brought to everything, making decisions about people's lives over pasta and wine she barely touched. I stood by the door, watching, learning. This was her world, elegant violence wrapped in expensive suits and sophisticated conversation. People's fates decided over meals that cost more than most people's, rent. Power exercised so smoothly it looked effortless, but I could see the calculation behind every word she spoke, every decision she made. "Your new bodyguard's very serious," one of the union officials commented. "Doesn't even pretend to not be listening. Daniel takes his work seriously. I appreciate that about him. Isabella didn't look at me, but I felt the acknowledgement. Besides, he's heard nothing that wasn't already understood by everyone in this room. After lunch, we returned to the tower for the afternoon finance meeting. 3 hours of reviewing spreadsheets and accounts that I barely understood, but Isabella navigated with ease. She had a mind for numbers that was almost frightening, catching discrepancies the accountants had missed, identifying patterns in cash flow that suggested problems before they became crises. By 5 p.m., when Sophia announced it was time to prepare for the plaza reception, exhaustion was pulling at me. I'd been hypervigilant for 9 hours, straight. My leg was screaming, and the lack of sleep from the previous night was catching up. Isabella noticed immediately. "You need a break." "I'm fine, Daniel." She stood, moved to stand directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that I'd been trying not to notice all day. "You're limping more than you were this morning. Your jaw's been clenched for the last hour, and you look like you haven't slept in a week. 48 hours, actually." Her expression shifted to concern. "Why?" "Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw hands on your throat. Because I kept replaying that moment, wondering what would have happened if I'd kept walking. Because my brain won't stop running scenarios where things went differently, worse, fatal." "Adjustment period," I said instead. "New job, new responsibilities. I'll adapt." "Sophia," Isabella called toward the outer office. "Delay our departure by 1 hour. Tell Marco we'll leave for the delay. Plaza at 7 instead of 6. "Isabella, that's not negotiable. You're going to eat something. Take your medication, I assume you have medication for the leg, and rest for 45 minutes. Then, we go to the reception." Her voice softened slightly. "I need you sharp, Daniel. Can't have you sharp if you're running on empty." She was right, of course. I'd pushed too hard, tried to prove something that didn't need proving. "Where do I rest?" "There's a lounge through that door. Couch, shower if you need it. Supplies in the cabinet. I'll have food brought up." The lounge was more comfortable than my entire apartment leather couch that was probably worth thousands. Private bathroom with a shower that had better water pressure than anything I'd experienced in civilian life. I found ibuprofen in the cabinet, took 3, and collapsed onto the couch. I didn't mean to fall asleep. Meant to just close my eyes for a moment. But exhaustion pulled me under before I could resist, and for once the dreams weren't violent. Just darkness, peaceful nothing. I woke to gentle pressure on my shoulder. Isabella stood over me, her expression soft in a way I hadn't seen before. "Daniel, it's 6:45. We need to get ready." I sat up quickly, too quickly, and my leg protested with sharp pain. I must have grimaced because Isabella frowned. "How bad is it?" "Really? Manageable." "Stop saying that. I need honest assessments, not brave deflection." "How bad?" I tested my weight, stood carefully. 6 out of 10. It'll ease up once I'm moving. Cold weather and lack of sleep make it worse, but I've worked through worse in combat zones. "You're not in a combat zone, aren't I?" I met her eyes. "You have enemies who want you dead. Your own captain tried to hurt you Thursday night. We don't know where he is or what he's planning. That sounds like a combat zone to me." Something shifted in her expression, recognition maybe, or acceptance. "You're right. I'm sorry. I forget. Sometimes that this," she gestured vaguely at the office, "the tower, her empire, that this is as dangerous as any war zone. I've just lived in it so long it feels normal. Nothing about this is normal, but I've handled worse with worse odds." I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in a mirror by the door. "What's the dress code for this reception?" "Black tie." "Don't worry," Sophia anticipated that. She gestured to a garment bag hanging by the door. "Tuxedo, proper size, already tailored. We keep emergency formal wear on hand for situations like this." The tuxedo fit perfectly, disturbingly so, given they'd never measured me. But I was starting to understand that Isabella's organization left nothing to chance, planned for every contingency, anticipated needs, before they arose. When I emerged, Isabella was waiting in a gown that made my breath catch. Deep emerald silk that highlighted her dark coloring. Elegant without being revealing, with a high neckline that covered the bruises on her throat. She'd styled her hair differently, softer, less severe, and the overall effect was stunning. "You clean up well," she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was thinking the same about me. "So do you. This is armor, Daniel. Beautiful armor for a battlefield where weapons are words and wounds are dealt with smiles." She picked up a clutch that probably concealed a weapon. "Ready? Always." The plaza was exactly what I expected, ostentatious wealth on display. Manhattan's elite mingling with people I was increasingly certain were criminals wearing expensive facades. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting people by name, making conversation that looked effortless, but I could tell was carefully calculated. I stayed 3 steps behind and to her right, close enough to intervene, far enough to not be intrusive. Watched everyone who approached, assessed threats, catalogued exits and potential problems. Isabella, a woman in her 60s, dripping diamonds, descended on us with air kisses and enthusiasm. "Darling, you look radiant. And who is this handsome gentleman?" "Daniel Cross, my new security consultant." "Daniel, this is Margaret Ashford. She sits on the board of the Metropolitan Museum." "Charming." Margaret assessed me with predatory interest. "Security consultant. How delightfully mysterious." The evening continued in similar fashion, Isabella working the room while I shadowed her, invisible to most but intensely aware of everything. I spotted 2 other security details I recognized from the tower, positioned strategically around the ballroom. Marco caught my eye once, nodded approval at my positioning. Around 9 p.m., Isabella excused herself to the restroom. I moved to follow, but she shook her head slightly. "The ladies' room, Daniel. Even you can't follow me there. I'll wait outside. Kyle's already covering that exit. I'll be fine for 3 minutes." I didn't like it, but she was. Right, following her into the women's restroom would create exactly the kind of scene we were trying to avoid. I watched her disappear through the door, then positioned myself with sightlines to both the restroom entrance and the main ballroom. That's when I saw him, Vincent Calabrese, wearing a server's uniform, carrying a tray of champagne glasses, moving through the crowd with his head down like he belonged there. But I'd studied his face in the files Marco showed me, memorized the way he moved, the particular set of his shoulders. My blood turned to ice. "Marco," I sub-vocalized into the comm unit they'd given me. "Vincent's here. Server's uniform, northwest corner of the ballroom, heading toward the restrooms. Copy. Kyle, intercept. James, secure the boss. Daniel, do not engage unless—" Vincent looked up, saw me, and his expression transformed from careful neutrality to pure hatred. His hand moved under the tray he was carrying, and I saw the bulge of a weapon. He wasn't heading for the restrooms randomly. He was heading for Isabella. I moved before conscious thought, pushing through the crowd with efficiency that came from years of tactical training. People shouted as I shoved past them, but I didn't care. Vincent's hand was coming up, the weapon clearing the tray, and the restroom door was opening. Isabella stepped out, saw Vincent, and her eyes went wide. I hit Vincent like a linebacker, driving him backward into a decorative column hard enough that I heard the air blast from his lungs. The gun clattered across marble floor, skittering under a table where guests were scrambling away in panic. Vincent swung at me, wild and desperate, connecting with my jaw hard enough that stars exploded across my vision. But I'd been hit harder by better fighters. I blocked his next swing, drove my knee into his stomach, then swept his legs out from under him. He went down hard, and I was on top of him instantly, knee on his chest, forearm across his throat, not enough pressure to crush, just enough to control. "Don't touch her," I snarled in his face, letting him see exactly how serious I was. "You don't get to hurt her. Not while I'm breathing." Kyle appeared with 2 other security personnel, hauling Vincent upright and dragging him toward a service exit while guests stared in shock. Marco was suddenly at my elbow, helping me up, checking me for injuries. "You good?" "Fine." "Where's Isabella?" "Right here." Her voice behind me, calm despite what had just happened. When I turned, she was standing perfectly composed, though I could see the shock in her eyes. "That was impressive, Daniel. That was necessary." My jaw throbbed where Vincent had connected. "He was going for you." "I know. I saw." She touched my face gently where the bruise was already forming. "Thank you." Again. The room was chaos now, guests demanding explanations, hotel security arriving, Marco speaking urgently into his phone to coordinate cleanup. But all I could see was Isabella, standing in her emerald gown, alive and safe because I'd been fast enough, aware enough, willing enough to put myself between her and danger. "We need to go," Marco said. "Now, before this becomes a bigger situation than it already is." The motorcade delivered us back to the tower in tense silence. Vincent was already there, I was told, secured in a basement room I hadn't known existed. Isabella didn't speak during the drive, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window at the passing city. It wasn't until we were back in her private office, the door closed and locked, that she finally broke. He was going to kill me. Her voice was small, so different from the commanding tone she'd used all day. Right there in the plaza, in front of 200 people. He was actually going to do it. But he didn't. He failed. Because of you. Again. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Twice now, Daniel. Twice you've saved my life. That's not coincidence. That's not luck. That's... She didn't finish the sentence. Just crossed the space between us in 3 strides and kissed me. It wasn't gentle or questioning. It was desperate, grateful, alive. Her hands fisting in my tuxedo jacket, pulling me closer, kissing me like I was oxygen, and she'd been drowning. And I kissed her back, because after watching her nearly die twice in 4 days, after spending every moment hyper-aware of how fragile life was, I needed to feel her alive and safe and real. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to mine. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "Probably the worst. You work for me. There are rules, boundaries. This complicates everything. I know, and I don't care." She kissed me again, softer this time. "I don't care about the rules or the complications. I just care that you're here, that you keep standing between me and danger, that you see me, not the complication. Boss or the criminal or the widow, just me. I do see you, Isabella. All of you." She pulled back slightly, studying my face. "What do we do now?" "Now we figure out what to do with Vincent." And then, I touched her face gently, careful of the bruises hidden under makeup. "Then we figure out us." "Us." She tested the word. I like the sound of that. Through the windows, Manhattan glittered with a million lights, indifferent to the drama playing out in this tower. Somewhere below, Vincent Calabrese was learning the consequences of his actions. Somewhere out there, other threats were forming, other challenges waiting. But in this moment, in this office, with Isabella in my arms and the ghost of her kiss still on my lips, I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Purpose. Not just the mechanical purpose of duty or obligation, but the deep, soul-level purpose that comes from protecting someone who matters, someone worth fighting for, someone worth the complications and the danger and the absolute certainty that my life would never be simple again. "Daniel," Isabella said softly, "whatever happens next with Vincent, with the organization, with us, I want you to know something." "What?" "You're not invisible anymore. Not to me. Not ever again." I pulled her closer, rested my chin on top of her head, and watched the city lights blur through windows that overlooked an empire she'd built, and I was now sworn to protect. "Good," I said, "because you're not alone anymore either. Vincent Calabrese died at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I know because I was there, standing in the basement room that didn't officially exist, watching Isabella make the decision that would define everything about who she was and what we were becoming together. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Monday night, after the kiss that changed everything, Isabella and I descended to the sublevels of Castellano Tower floors that weren't listed on any building schematic, accessed by elevators that required biometric scanning and codes that changed daily. The deeper we went, the more the elegant corporate facade fell away, revealing the skeletal truth of what this organization really was. Vincent was in a room that was clean, well-lit, and absolutely terrifying in its clinical efficiency. White walls, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, drains in the corners that I tried not to think too hard about. He was secured with zip ties, face already showing the damage from where I'd taken him down at the plaza. Marco stood guard outside, along with 2 men I hadn't met harder looking than the security team upstairs, with the kind of scars that spoke of violence as a lifestyle rather than a profession. "He's been asking for you," Marco said to Isabella. "Begging, actually. Promises he can explain, that it was a moment of madness, that he'll disappear and never come back. They all say that." Isabella's voice was cold. The vulnerable woman from her office gone, replaced by something harder. "Let me talk to him alone." "Boss," Marco started. "Daniel will be with me." "That's sufficient." Marco looked at me, some silent question passing between us. I nodded once. Whatever was about to happen, I could handle it. I'd seen worse in Afghanistan interrogations that left scars on my soul, decisions made in the dark where morality became negotiable and survival was the only currency that mattered. The door closed behind us with a heavy finality. Vincent looked up, and I saw fear transform his features raw. animal terror that he couldn't hide behind bravado or anger anymore. Isabella, please. I can explain. Explain what, Vincent? She circled him slowly, a predator assessing prey. Explain why you attacked me in a stairwell? Explain why you ignored my direct order to relocate to Miami? Explain why you acquired a weapon, posed as a server, and attempted to murder me at a public charity event? It wasn't supposed to be like this. His voice cracked. You were supposed to fail. When Carlo died, you were supposed to fall apart, and the organization would return to the families who built it. But you didn't fail. You got stronger. You made decisions that marginalize people like me, and I. He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't let you destroy everything my father worked for. Your father worked for my husband. He was a soldier, Vincent, not a general. He knew his place. You never learned that lesson. Because my place should have been at the top. The words burst out of him, desperate and furious. I have the bloodline, the connections, the history with the families. You're just some woman from Brooklyn who married well. You don't deserve to command people like me. The silence that followed was arctic. Daniel, Isabella said quietly, not taking her eyes off Vincent. How many times have you heard variations of that argument? I knew what she was asking. How many times had men told her she didn't deserve a position, didn't belong in power, should step aside for someone with a penis and a pedigree? Too many to count, I imagine. Hundreds of times. Sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit, but always there the assumption that I'm inferior because of my gender, that I'm weak because I didn't grow up in this world, that I somehow stole something that rightfully belongs to men like Vincent. She moved closer to him, crouched to eye level. But here's what you never understood. I didn't steal this position. I earned it. Every decision, every sacrifice, every brutal choice that kept this organization profitable and powerful, that was me. Not my late husband's ghost, not the old guard's traditions. Me. You don't have what it takes to lead, Vincent spat. You're too soft, too emotional, too careful. My voice cut through his words like a knife. Very careful how you finish that sentence. Vincent looked at me, really looked, and something in my expression made him recoil. You're fucking her, aren't you? That's why you protect her. That's why a janitor suddenly becomes her personal guard. She's spreading her. I moved before conscious thought, my hand closing around his throat, cutting off the vile words before they could fully form. Not hard enough to crush, but hard enough that he understood exactly how close to death he was. Daniel. Isabella's hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Let him breathe. I need him conscious for what comes next. I released him, stepped back, flexing my hand to release the tension. Vincent gasped for air, his face flushed red, eyes watering. You made me a promise Thursday night, Isabella said conversationally. You said you'd go to Miami without complaint. You broke that promise. You made me look weak in front of my organization, suggested I couldn't control my own captains. That's unacceptable. So what now? Vincent's voice was hoarse from where I'd gripped his throat. You kill me? Make me disappear? That'll just prove you're as ruthless as they say. No, Vincent. Killing you proves I'm competent. There's a difference. She stood, moved to stand beside me, and I felt her hand find mine, fingers interlacing. You tried to kill me twice. You called me weak, questioned my authority, and worst of all, you did it in front of Daniel, who now knows exactly what kind of threats I face daily. He's nobody. A crippled soldier playing bodyguard for a woman who... Finish that sentence and I'll let him do whatever he wants to you. Isabella's voice carried absolute certainty. Daniel has shown remarkable restraint so far, but he has limits, and you're testing them. I squeezed her hand once, acknowledgement that she was right. Everything in me wanted to make Vincent hurt for the things he'd said, for the threats he'd made, for putting his hands on Isabella and thinking he had that right. Here's what's going to happen, Isabella continued. I'm going to leave this room. I'm going to go upstairs and have a drink and try to process the fact that one of my own captains attempted to murder me in public. And you... She looked at Vincent with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so cold. You're going to have a conversation with the people who handle problems I can't solve through negotiation. Isabella, please. You stopped being Vincent Calabrese, captain in my organization, the moment you pulled a gun on me. Now you're just a problem that needs solving. She turned to leave, then paused. Daniel, are you staying? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Was I staying to witness what happened next? Was I complicit in whatever violence was about to unfold? Was I crossing a line from protector to participant in the darker aspects of her world? I'm staying. The words came easier than they should have. Until it's done. Something passed across Isabella's face, relief, maybe, or recognition. Then I'll see you upstairs when you're finished. She left, and I was alone with Vincent and the weight of what came next. Marco entered with the two hard men, and what followed was brutal, efficient, and absolutely necessary. They didn't torture him. This wasn't about extracting information or causing pain for its own sake. It was about ending a threat permanently, cleanly, in a way that sent a message to anyone else considering betrayal. Vincent Calabresi died at 3:47 a.m., and I watched it happen without flinching, without looking away, because this was the world Isabella lived in and I'd chosen to be part of it. When it was over, Marco looked at me with something like respect. Most people vomit their first time. I've seen worse. I believe you. He gestured to the door. Go, clean up, be with her. She needs you right now more than she needs us. I found Isabella in her office, standing at the windows overlooking the pre-dawn city, still in the emerald gown from the plaza, a glass of whiskey in her hand that she wasn't drinking. It's done? She asked without turning. It's done. Did he suffer? No. It was quick. She nodded, took a sip of whiskey, set it down. I've ordered deaths before, made decisions that resulted in people not waking up the next morning. But this was different. Vincent wasn't just an enemy or a rival, he was family, in the only way that matters in this world. And I still had him killed. He tried to kill you. Twice. He didn't leave you a choice. There's always a choice, Daniel. I could have exiled him for real. Sent him so far away he'd never be a threat again. Could have broken him financially, socially, made him irrelevant without making him dead. She turned to face me, and I saw tears tracking down her face, cutting through makeup that had survived an entire evening. But I chose death because it was easier, cleaner, more final. What does that make me? I crossed to her, took the whiskey glass from her hand, set it aside, and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, the iron, control she maintained all day finally crumbling in the privacy of this moment. It makes you someone who protects what's hers, I said quietly. Someone who understands that in your world, showing mercy to people like Vincent gets you killed. It makes you a leader who makes hard decisions so the 200 families who depend on you can sleep safely. It makes me a killer. It makes you a survivor. I held her tighter, felt her shake with silent sobs. And for what it's worth, I don't think less of you. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. We stood like that for a long time, her crying silently while I held her, both of us processing what had happened and what it meant for whatever was building between us. Eventually, she pulled back, wiped her face, tried to compose herself. I'm a mess. You're human. There's a difference. That small smile, the one I was learning, meant she appreciated what I'd said even if she didn't entirely believe it. Stay with me tonight. Not, she hesitated, not for anything physical. I just don't want to be alone. I'll stay as long as you need. Her private quarters were in the tower, another floor that didn't officially exist, accessed through her office via a hidden elevator. The space was surprisingly modest given her wealth and position, comfortable rather than ostentatious, with personal touches that made it feel lived in rather than just inhabited. She disappeared into the bathroom to change and remove makeup while I stood awkwardly in the living area, still in my tuxedo, trying to figure out what the protocol was for staying overnight with a Mafia boss who'd just ordered someone killed. When she emerged in silk pajamas, face scrubbed clean, bruises on her throat finally visible without makeup to hide them, she looked younger, vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself to be in public. You can sleep in the guest room if you prefer, she said, but if you're comfortable, I'd rather you stayed close. Your bed? My bed, just sleeping. I need to feel safe tonight, and you make me feel safe. We lay in her king-sized bed, fully clothed despite the pajamas and tuxedo pants, with careful space between us. But as the minutes passed, and dawn started breaking over Manhattan, that space closed. Her hand found mine. Her head settled on my chest, my arm wrapped around her shoulders, holding her close. Tell me about Afghanistan, she said quietly. Tell me something that helps me understand how you can witness what you saw tonight and still be here with me. So I told her. About villages where we provided security for tribal leaders who ruled through violence and fear, but who were the only thing standing between their people and worse alternatives. About making choices between bad and worse. About watching people die who maybe deserved it and maybe didn't. about the moral compromise that came with operating in a world where traditional ethics didn't apply. We called it the gray zone, I said. Not black and white, not good versus evil, just different shades of gray where you did the least harmful thing you could and hoped you could live with yourself afterward. And can you live with yourself? Most days. The nightmares help process what the conscious mind can't handle. The PTSD is my brain's way of trying to reconcile what I saw and did with who I thought I was. I stroked her hair absently. Being here, with you, protecting you, it gives me purpose again. Makes the gray zone feel less overwhelming. Even knowing what I am, what I do, especially knowing that. Because at least with you, the choice is clear. You're worth protecting. Whatever else you might be, whoever else might suffer because of decisions you make, you're worth it. She lifted her head, looked at me with those dark eyes that saw everything. How can you be sure? Because when Vincent had his hands on your throat, when I saw him reaching for that gun tonight, I didn't think about morality or consequences or the complexity of your world. I just knew I had to keep you safe. That's all that mattered. That's all that still matters. She kissed me then, soft and sweet and grateful. And this time when we settled back into the pillows, there was no space between us at all. We slept through dawn and into late morning, exhaustion from the previous days finally catching up with both of us. When I woke, Isabella was already up, being showered and dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater that made her look almost normal, like someone you might pass on the street rather than someone who commanded a criminal empire. "This coffee's ready," she said, noticing I was awake. "And Sophia's cleared my schedule for today. No meetings, no obligations, just recovery time." "Is that normal? Taking a day off?" "Nothing about the last 4 days has been normal, Daniel. I think we've earned a break from normal." She sat on the edge of the bed, touched my face gently. "How's your jaw? You took a solid hit from Vincent." I'd forgotten about that in the chaos of everything that followed. Testing it now, I felt the dull throb of a bruise forming. "It'll be fine. I've had worse." "I'm starting to think that's your answer to everything." Usually is. We spent the day in her private quarters, and for the first time I saw Isabella not as the intimidating crime boss or the woman in danger, but just as a person. She made breakfast surprisingly domestic given everything else about her, and we ate together while watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Tell me about before," I said. "Before Carlo, before all this. Who was Isabella before she became Isabella Castellano?" She was quiet for a moment, gathering memories. "Isabella Marchetti, Brooklyn girl, second-generation Italian-American. Parents owned a small restaurant in Bensonhurst. Nothing fancy, just good food and family atmosphere. I worked there growing up. Learned to cook, learned to manage. Books, learned how to read people and what they wanted before they knew themselves." "How did you meet Carlo?" "He came in for dinner one night, older than me by 15 years, already established in the organization, looking for somewhere quiet to eat where he wouldn't be bothered. We talked while I served him, just casual conversation about food and family and Brooklyn neighborhoods. He came back the next week, and the week after that. 6 months later, he proposed. Did you love him?" I respected him, admired him, learned from him. Love. She hesitated. Love came later, in its own way. Not the passionate romance you read about, but a partnership. He taught me his world, gave me access to power I never dreamed of, and when he died, he trusted me to continue what he'd built. Do you miss him? I miss who I was when he was alive. The certainty of my role, the clarity of just being his wife and eventual heir. After he died, everything became complicated. Every decision was mine alone to make, every consequence mine to bear. She looked at me. "Until you're the first person since Carlo who's made me feel like I'm not carrying all this weight alone." "You're not anymore." We spent the afternoon talking, really talking. The kind of deep conversation where you share pieces of yourself you usually keep hidden. She told me about the first time she ordered someone killed, how she'd vomited afterward and couldn't eat for 2 days, but knew she'd do it again if necessary, because weakness meant death in her world. I told her about the firefight that ended my military career, about dragging my squad leader from a burning vehicle while insurgents fired at us, about waking up in a hospital in Germany and learning I'd never walk quite right again. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Staying in combat when you could have rotated out? Every day and never." "I regret the pain, the permanent damage, the nightmares that won't stop. But I don't regret saving him. That's who I am at my core, someone who stands between danger and people who need protecting. The Marines didn't make me that way. They just gave me skills to do it more effectively. And now you're using those skills to protect me. Now I'm using them to protect someone I'm starting to care about more than I should. More than is probably wise, but can't seem to stop. She kissed me for the third time, and this time, it didn't stop at just a kiss. This time, her hands found the buttons of my shirt, my hands found the zipper of her jeans, and we discovered each other with desperate urgency that spoke to how close we'd both come to death, how precious life felt when you'd watched it nearly slip away. Making love to Isabella Castellano was like everything else about her intense, controlled chaos, powerful need wrapped in careful attention. She was demanding and generous in equal measure, taking what she wanted while making sure I was right there with her. And when we finally collapsed, together in tangled sheets, both breathing hard and satisfied, I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless for 6 years. Purpose, connection, home. That was, she started, then stopped. I don't have words. Neither do I. Are we making a mistake? Moving too fast? Crossing too many lines? Probably. But I stopped caring about mistakes around the time I watched you nearly die twice in 4 days. I pulled her closer. Whatever this is, however complicated it gets, I'm all in, Isabella. You need to know that. All in with a criminal who orders deaths and runs illegal operations. All in with a woman who's strong enough to lead in a world designed to destroy her, who cries when she makes hard choices, who makes me feel like I finally found where I belong. I kissed her forehead. The criminal empire part is just context. She laughed, real and genuine, and I realized it was the first time I'd heard her truly laugh. You're insane, Daniel Cross. Probably, but you like it. God help me, I do. The rest of the day passed in a bubble of intimacy that felt stolen from a life neither of us actually lived. We ordered food, watched movies, talked about everything and nothing. She showed me photographs from her childhood, a younger Isabella with her parents in front of their restaurant, birthday parties, confirmation photos, the visual history of a normal Brooklyn girl who'd somehow ended up commanding a criminal empire. I showed her the few possessions I'd kept from my military service medals I never displayed. Letters from my squad members, a challenge coin from my commanding officer, the physical remnants of who I'd been before. Shrapnel and PTSD in civilian life had transformed me into someone else. We're both survivors, she said, studying a photo of me in dress uniform, younger and unmarked by the things that came later. Both carrying trauma we've learned to function around but never quite escape. Maybe that's why this works. We understand what it costs to survive in worlds designed to break us. Or maybe, she set down the photo, maybe we're just two damaged people clinging to each other and calling it connection. Does it matter? If it feels real, if it helps us both survive whatever comes next, does it matter whether it fits some perfect definition of healthy relationship? She considered this, then shook her head. No, I suppose it doesn't. By evening, reality was intruding. Sophia had sent updates about Vincent's disappearance being officially recorded, about his father being informed, about the careful narrative being constructed. Marco reported that the organization was stable. That word about Vincent's fate had spread quietly, that challenges to Isabella's authority had decreased dramatically. They're afraid again, Isabella said, reading through the reports on her tablet. Vincent's death reminds them what happens when you cross me. Fear is currency in this world, and right now I'm very wealthy. Does that bother you, being feared? It bothers me that fear is necessary, but I learned long ago that love and respect aren't reliable in this world. Fear is. Fear keeps people in line, prevents challenges, maintains stability. She set down the tablet. But with you, I don't want fear. I don't want you staying because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. I'm not afraid of you, Isabella. I'm afraid for you, which is different. I'm afraid of what happens if I'm not there when the next threat appears. I'm afraid of losing what we're building before I fully understand what it is. Then stay. Choose this. Choose me, knowing exactly what it means. I already have. The next few weeks established a new pattern to our lives. Publicly, I was Isabella's head of security professional, competent, maintaining appropriate distance. We attended meetings together, traveled to various Castellano operations throughout the city, presented a united front to an organization, still adjusting to my sudden prominence. Privately, I moved out of my studio in Queens and into Isabella's quarters in the tower. We fell into domestic routines that felt surreal, given the circumstances, cooking dinner together, sleeping tangled in each other's arms. waking up to coffee and conversation before facing whatever crises the day presented. The nightmares didn't stop, but they changed. Instead of burning Humvees and insurgent attacks, I dreamed about stairwells and hands on throats and being too slow, too late, watching Isabella die while I stood frozen and helpless. I'd wake gasping, heart racing, and she'd be there solid, real, alive, reminding me that this time I'd been fast enough, this time I'd saved her. They're getting worse, she observed one morning after I'd woken us both at 3 a.m., thrashing and shouting warnings in my sleep. The dreams. They'll pass. Always do eventually. Daniel, have you considered talking to someone? A therapist who specializes in trauma? Tried that after my discharge. Didn't help. Therapy requires talking about things that are classified, experiences I can't share with someone who hasn't lived them. What if you talk to someone who understood violence? Someone who's lived in similar spaces? She hesitated. There's a doctor who works with our people, ex-military himself. Understands the operational realities. He has clearance to hear whatever you need to say. The idea of therapy still felt like weakness, like admitting I couldn't handle what I'd experienced. But waking Isabella with my nightmares wasn't fair to her, and the exhaustion from broken sleep was starting to affect my performance. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. 2 months after Vincent's death, Isabella called a meeting of all the family captains, the first full gathering since she'd taken control 4 years earlier. 12 men, representing different aspects of the organization's operations, assembled in a conference room on the Prediction, the 40th floor, while I stood guard by the door, watching everything. Gentlemen, Isabella began, standing at the head of the table with the kind of authority that commanded respect. Thank you for coming. We're here to address recent events and establish clarity about the future of this organization. The men shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew what recent events meant: Vincent's attempted coup and subsequent disappearance. The official story was that he'd fled to Europe to avoid gambling debts, but everyone in this room knew the truth. Vincent Calabrese challenged my authority, Isabella continued. He attempted to harm me, to undermine operations, to destabilize what we've built. His fate serves as a reminder that I don't tolerate threats to this family's stability, regardless of who makes them. She let that sink in before continuing. But his challenge also revealed weaknesses in our structure. Too many decisions flowing through me alone, too much concentrated power without proper distribution. That changes today. This caught everyone's attention. Distributed power meant opportunity, meant some of these men might finally get the advancement they'd been seeking. I'm restructuring operations into 4 divisions. Traditional operations, legitimate business development, security and enforcement, and political relationships. Each division gets a director with significant autonomy, reporting directly to me quarterly rather than weekly. She gestured to Marco. Marco Donovan will head security and enforcement, effective immediately. Marco nodded, unsurprised. This had clearly been planned. Thomas Ricci, Isabella indicated, a man in his 50s with silver hair. You'll take traditional operations. Your experience with the unions and construction makes you ideal. The promotions continued, power being distributed to men who'd proven loyalty and competence. I watched their faces, reading the mixture of satisfaction, ambition, and residual fear. They were getting what they wanted, but Isabella was making clear that it came at her discretion. It could be revoked at her whim. Finally, Isabella said, and her hand moved subtly toward where I stood by the door. I'm formalizing Daniel Cross's position. He's more than security now. He's my chief advisor on all operations, with authority to speak on my behalf when I'm not available. His word is my word. His decisions are my decisions. Anyone who has a problem with that can voice it now. The silence was absolute. No one was stupid enough to challenge her, especially not with me standing there, the man who'd taken down Vincent twice and watched him die without flinching. Good, then we're clear. Isabella's smile was sharp. This organization survived Carlo's death because I was strong enough to hold it together. It will continue to thrive because I'm smart enough to share power with people I trust. Work with me, and you'll prosper. Work against me. She didn't need to finish the sentence. After the meeting, as the captains filed out with their new assignments and carefully neutral expressions, Marco approached me. Chief Advisor, he said with a slight grin. That's a hell of a promotion from Janitor. I'm still figuring out what it actually means. It means you're second in command in everything but title. It means when she's not available, they answer to you. It means, he lowered his voice, you're now fully part of this world, Daniel. No going back. I know. And you're okay with that? I looked across the conference room to where Isabella was speaking with Thomas Ricci, her posture confident, her voice carrying authority. Every inch the leader she'd proven herself to be. Watched the way she glanced at me periodically, checking without being obvious, making sure I was okay with the role she'd just publicly given me. I'm more than okay with it. That night, in the privacy of her quarters, Isabella pulled me onto the couch and curled against me with the kind of easy intimacy that had developed over 2 months of sleeping in the same bed, sharing the same space, building something neither of us had expected but both desperately needed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for today, for standing there like you belonged, like you'd always been part of this, making it clear to everyone that you're with me. I am with you, completely, even knowing that chief advisor isn't just a title, that you'll be making decisions that affect hundreds of people, that you'll carry responsibility for operations that sometimes cross legal lines. Isabella, I watched Vincent die and didn't flinch. I've spent 2 months learning every aspect of your operations. I'm not naive about what this world requires, and I'm not going anywhere." She kissed me, deep and grateful, then pulled back with a mischievous smile I'd learned meant she had something planned. "Good, because I have a proposition." "Another one?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between us, stunning in their simplicity and absolutely terrifying in their implications. "What?" "Marry me, Daniel. Not now, not tomorrow, but soon. Make this official. Show the world that you're not just my security chief or my advisor, you're my partner in everything." "Isabella, we've known each other for 2 months. I've known you for 2 months. I've trusted you with my life for 2 months. I've watched you integrate into my world without losing who you are. I've slept beside you and woken up grateful you're there. How much longer do I need to wait before I'm allowed to want forever? This isn't about time. It's about—" I stopped, trying to organize thoughts that felt scattered and overwhelming. "Marriage in your world isn't just about us. It's political, strategic. It changes power dynamics and sends messages, and it tells everyone in this organization that you're untouchable, that harming you means harming me, that we're a united front against anyone who thinks they can divide us." She took my hands. "But more than that, it tells you that I'm all in too, that this isn't temporary or convenient, that I'm choosing you the same way you've chosen me." I looked at her, this powerful, dangerous, beautiful woman who'd somehow decided a broken ex-Marine was worth building a life with, and felt every logical argument dissolve. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. But on one condition." "What condition?" "We do it small, private, just us and the people who matter. Not some massive political statement. Just 2 people who found each other in impossible circumstances and decided to make it official." Her smile could have lit the city. "I can work with that." We were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in her private quarters, with Marco and Sofia as witnesses. An elderly priest who'd known Carlo and asked no questions about the irregularity of the situation. I wore a new suit, Isabella wore cream silk, and we exchanged vows that promised partnership, protection, and presence through whatever came next. When the priest pronounced us husband and wife, when I kissed her as Daniel Cross Castellano, the name we'd decided on together, hyphenating our identities, I felt something fundamental shift. This wasn't just romance or convenience or strategic alliance. This was choice, commitment, 2 survivors deciding that surviving together was better than surviving alone. The organization learned about our marriage through a formal announcement the next day. Mixed reactions, some of the old guard grumbled about tradition. Younger members saw it as Isabella continuing to make bold choices. Everyone recognized it as a demonstration of power and unity. "Let them grumble," Isabella said, reading through response reports while I packed for our brief honeymoon 3 days at a private estate upstate, the longest we could afford to be away from operations. "They'll adjust. They always do. And if they don't, then they'll learn the same lesson." Vincent learned. "I don't tolerate threats to my family. And you." She pulled me into a kiss. "Your family now. The most important family. The one I chose rather than inherited." The honeymoon was blissfully uneventful. 3 days of normalcy, of pretending we were just a regular couple rather than a mafia boss, and her former janitor turned chief of security. We cooked meals, took walks through the property, made love without the weight of the city pressing down on us, and talked about futures that might actually be possible. "Do you want children?" Isabella asked one evening as we sat by a fire, her head on my shoulder, both of us comfortable in a way we rarely achieved in the tower. I haven't thought about it in years. Military life didn't leave room for that kind of planning. But now, with me, I considered the question seriously. Children in this world, growing up surrounded by violence and criminal enterprise, learning too young that their parents lived by differently rules, but also children who'd be protected, provided for, given opportunities that most people never dreamed of. Maybe, I said finally, someday, when things are more stable, when we've built something that feels sustainable. Fair enough, I can wait. She snuggled closer. I spent 4 years building this organization, proving I deserved to lead. Maybe the next 4 years are about building something else. A life, a family, a future that's about more than just survival. I like that idea. We returned to Manhattan rejuvenated but realistic. Nothing fundamental had changed. Isabella still ran a criminal empire. I still protected her and advised her. We still lived in a world where violence was currency and trust was rare. But something had shifted in how we approached it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building. 6 months into our marriage, Isabella got pregnant. She told me on a Tuesday morning, standing in our bathroom with a positive test in her hand and tears, streaming down her face joy and terror in equal measure. "I'm pregnant, Daniel. We're going to have a baby." I pulled her into my arms, held her while she cried, processed the magnitude of what this meant. A child. Our child. Growing up in Castellano Tower, surrounded by security and operations, and the constant low-level danger of Isabella's world. "Are you happy?" she asked when she could finally speak. "Really?" Terrified, overwhelmed, and happier than I've been since before Afghanistan. I kissed her forehead. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby," she repeated, like saying it out loud made it more real. "God, Daniel, I'm 40 years old. This wasn't in my plan. I was supposed to be past this phase of life. Plans change. We're proof of that." The pregnancy was carefully managed by the same doctor who'd examined Isabella after Vincent's attack, who understood the need for absolute discretion and premium care. We told only Marco and Sophia initially, keeping it quiet, until Isabella was safely through the first trimester and the risks had decreased. When we finally announced it to the organization, the response was overwhelming. Gifts arrived from every operation. Flowers and baby items, and carefully worded congratulations that carried the subtext that Isabella's heir was now coming, that succession was being secured in the most traditional way possible. "They think this makes me weaker," Isabella observed, reading through the messages while resting in bed per doctor's orders. Pregnancy at 40 came with complications that required careful monitoring. A woman distracted by impending motherhood, less focused on business. Then they'll learn the same lesson everyone else learned. You're never weaker, just more dangerous in different ways. She laughed, resting her hand on the small bump that was just starting to show. "This baby is going to grow up so loved and so protected and probably so confused about why other children's parents don't have armed security and underground operations centers. We'll figure it out. Give them as normal a childhood as possible while being honest about the reality of our world. Our world. I like how you say that. Like you fully own this life now." "I do own it. Chose it. Built it with you." I placed my hand over hers on her stomach. "And now we're building the next generation." The baby, a girl we named Elena, after Isabella's mother, was born on a spring morning 8 months later. The delivery was complicated, required emergency intervention, and for 6 terrifying hours I thought I might lose them both. But Isabella was strong, stubborn, refused to let complications defeat her, and Elena arrived screaming and healthy and absolutely perfect. Holding my daughter for the first time, this tiny person who was half me and half the woman I loved, I understood for the first time what people meant when they talked about purpose beyond survival. Elena was the future, was hope, was the proof that, even in the gray zones where we lived, beauty could exist. "She's beautiful," Isabella whispered, exhausted but radiant. "She's perfect. She's ours." We brought Elena home to the tower, to a nursery that had been secured and monitored and decorated with the same attention to detail Isabella brought to everything. And we began the complicated dance of being parents while running a criminal empire, of changing diapers between meetings, of night feedings mixed with security briefings. It was chaos. It was exhausting. It was absolutely perfect. Marco became Elena's godfather, taking his role seriously in ways that would have been amusing if they weren't so touching. This hardened security chief who'd seen and done terrible things would hold Elena with absolute tenderness, would threaten anyone who looked at her wrong, would reorganize entire security protocols around her safety. "She's going to grow up thinking armed guards are normal," Marco observed one afternoon, watching Elena sleep in her bassinet while we worked through operational reports. "She's going to grow up safe," I corrected. "That's all that matters." 3 years had passed since that October night when I'd burst through a stairwell door to find Vincent Calabrese with his hands on Isabella's throat. 3 years since I'd stopped being invisible, since I'd chosen this complicated, dangerous, impossible life. Now I stood in Isabella's office, our office really, since I spent as much time here as she did watching Elena toddle around while we reviewed reports from the organization's various operations. She was 2 years old, precocious and curious, with Isabella's dark eyes and my stubborn determination. "Daddy!" Elena crashed into my legs, demanding attention with the absolute confidence of a toddler who'd never known anything but love and security. "Hey, princess. What are you up to?" "Playing." Marco gave me a toy. I looked at Marco, who was unsuccessfully hiding a grin. A toy. A stuffed bear. Very innocent. Doesn't have any surveillance equipment hidden in it at all. Marco. "Okay, maybe a small tracker. Just for safety." "You can never be too careful." Isabella laughed, the sound filling the office with warmth that had been missing 4 years ago, when this space was just the seat of power rather than a home. "Our daughter has the most overprotected childhood in Manhattan history. And she's thriving," I pointed out, watching Elena return to her toys, regular toys, not surveillance equipment disguised as stuffed animals, despite Marco's best efforts. "She is," Isabella agreed, moving to stand beside me, her hand finding mine naturally. "We all are." It was true. The organization was more profitable than ever. Isabella's leadership unquestioned after years of successful operations and smart strategic decisions. My nightmares had decreased. The therapy I'd finally committed to helping me process trauma in ways I'd never allowed myself before. And our family, the one we'd chosen and built and fought for, was strong. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabella asked quietly, the question she'd asked before but in a different context. "Stepping through that stairwell door? Choosing this life?" I looked at Elena playing on the floor, at Isabella standing beside me, at the view of Manhattan spreading out below us, at the empire we'd built together from violence and necessity and unexpected love. Not for a second. Even knowing what it cost, what you gave up. I didn't give up anything. I found everything I didn't know I was missing. I pulled her closer. A purpose that matters. A family that needs me. A woman who makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. Sweet talker. Truth teller. She kissed me, soft and familiar. The kind of kiss that carried the weight of 3 years together and the promise of decades more. "I love you, Daniel Cross Castellano. Former janitor, current chief advisor. Best decision I ever made. I love you too, Isabella. And I promise no matter what comes next, whatever threats or challenges or complications, I'll keep standing between you and danger. That's what I do. That's who I am. My protector. Your partner. There's a difference." Through the office windows, sunset painted Manhattan in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in this city, threats were forming, challenges waiting, the constant danger that came with Isabella's world. But here, in this moment, we were safe. We were whole. We were family. And that was worth every complicated, dangerous, impossible choice that had brought us to this point. Elena laughed at something only she found funny, the sound pure and joyful and absolutely perfect. Marco moved to scoop her up, making her shriek with delight while Sophia appeared with dinner preparations, and the organization continued its operations below us. This was our life now. Not simple, never easy, but ours completely. And I wouldn't change a single thing. Thank you so much for watching. Until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.